Welcome back to Spotlight. For the third time this season, the Oregon Ducks have claimed the top spot in the college football bracket rankings reveal after becoming the first power conference team to clinch a spot in the conference championship game. There you see the bracket there is number 2 Texas and Miami getting that bye there alongside Boise State currently. BYU still projected to make the field, as we can see here, but certainly a lot of interesting topics when it comes to the SEC. Lane Kiffin talking about the SEC championship and why his team might not want to play in that game. Here's more.
You know, it's changed. The conference championship, could have a big impact both ways for people. So I've talked to other coaches, so I'll just kind of give you the feeling from some other coaches that, they don't want to be in it. The risk to get a bye, the reward to get a bye versus the risk to get knocked out completely. I mean, that's a really big risk, just to get a bye. So I think it's ended up being a very unique situation of all, postseason sports, the way that system's set up there and how you could go to that and get knocked out. And if you don't go, you're in.
Questions?
I'm not a big gambler, but that's the kind of one of them Vegas, like poker table thing. Like, that's all in.
Yeah, that awkward pause kind of got me too there. I would have kind of kept to talk there too. As we bring in our college football crew, we've got Danny Kanell here on set with us. We also bring in Dennis Dodd, longtime cover of the SEC. Dennis, I want to come to you first here because when I first read the quote on paper, I was a little bit confused coming from SEC, a team that we know is going to be in the college football playoff no matter what. But after listening to Lane Kiffin, kind of some interesting perspective there. I'd love to hear what you thought on what he had to say.
Yeah, I think he's absolutely right in this new expanded playoff era. But, Haley, until and unless there's a way to replace that $3 to $5 million per team that they get for playing this game in these major conferences, they're not going to go away, especially in the SEC. Now, if there's some other way to replace that money, say if they go to 16 teams in a couple of years and the networks pay them more money to make up for that, yeah, I can see them definitely going away. But again, in the SEC, that game's an institution. I think this is year 28. Having said that, over the course of the years, the best place to be, I saw this coming into the playoff, the best place to be in this playoff is in third place in the major conferences. Because you know what I'm getting to. You don't have to risk your record in a conference championship game. You don't have to risk your health. You don't have to practice an extra week. You can have time off before the playoff. So right now, those teams are in the SEC. It would be probably Ole Miss. It would be Lane's team, and maybe in Indiana in the Big Ten. And I've said for weeks, looking at Indiana's schedule, they're in great shape. Lose to Ohio State, sit there for a couple of weeks. You're in the playoff. You're fine. I think third place is the best place to be.
I agree, especially from the SEC, because you're virtually guaranteed a spot there. You don't want to be in the ACC or Big 12 because you'll be sitting at home watching the entire playoff. But you make a great point. And Lane Kiffin was getting dragged a little bit for these comments, but I think he brings up something that is this great unknown, is what is going to happen to the conference championship losers. And if you do have a game where maybe you lose by 2 or 3 touchdowns, are you sent home entirely for what is supposed to be an incredible accomplishment of making your conference championship game? And I think that's what he's alluding to, and that is a great risk that we just don't know right now. So I think he's absolutely onto something, and we've seen this happen before in the college football playoff with 4 teams where 2017 Alabama did not win their division, did not play in the SEC championship game, still got into the college football playoff with 4 teams, won the 2 games, won the national championship. I don't think any Alabama fan ever cared about that SEC championship. They won the ultimate prize, which is the national championship. So I think you're spot on about being that third place team in the Big Ten or the SEC. You virtually get a bye, because you're sitting at home watching the conference championship weekend. You get healthy, as you mentioned, and then you start your little run when you get to the first round. And by the way, Dennis, you'll probably host a home playoff game, so you get the money from that as well. So I think you're right. I think that third place team in the Big Ten or the SEC is really that sweet spot.
If the season were to end today and the playoff would get underway, it would actually be Texas and Texas A&M playing. They will meet next weekend in rivalry week as the season kind of wraps up there. So interesting. But Danny, when it comes to the SEC, it's kind of weird where we're sitting right now, where in the traditional 4-team playoff, we're used to that being dominated by the SEC. Right now that we're seeing this 12-team expansion, there's been some conversation about how dominant the conference has been. Where do you stand on the SEC debate?
So I think the SEC, this is a lot of people pick me as an anti-SEC guy. I think they're the strongest conference in college football. That being said, that is why you're probably going to get 4 teams, which is double what the ACC and maybe triple the Big 12 and maybe triple what the ACC gets in as well. But stop being greedy and trying to get 5 and even 6 teams in there. That's where I have to draw the line, Dennis, is okay, yeah, let's have this conversation. We can debate the teams that are going to be in there when the dust settles. And I think it probably will settle itself out. I think it's 4 teams from the SEC will get in, which is great. And I think they should be happy with it. But they know that if you pound the table for 6, there's a greater chance you get those 4 and you don't have to worry about only getting 3 in. But I think 4 is probably the sweet spot. And again, I know you're aware of this, Dennis. The ACC and the Big 12 had an opportunity to potentially sign on for a format that would have given you 3 SEC, 3 Big 10, 2 Big 12, and 2 ACC, and then an automatic qualifier, or an at-large, and the ACC and Big 12 turned it down. Now, if you had that same deal on the table, I think the ACC and Big 12 would say, yep, sign us up. We'll take those 2 spots guaranteed, because now they're looking at probably only getting 1 in a piece.
Yeah, we're making calm, rational points here. They make total sense. Danny, Feinbaum Nation isn't going to stand for fools. This involves Indiana. This involves Notre Dame. If Notre Dame wins out and takes one of those at-large spots, that takes away a spot. If Indiana loses big Saturday, that's going to that'll program that Feinbaum for a week. You know, they don't deserve to be in. Here's the problem with the SEC. It's 6 teams deep right now. And I would make the case that any of those 6 teams could go on a run and win a national championship. The problem is Texas has only played 1 of the 5 and lost to Georgia. A&M has yet to play any of the 5. They'll play Texas on November 30th. Georgia's played one of the toughest schedules in the country and lost twice. Alabama's beaten Georgia but lost to Vandy. Ole Miss has had a great year, but they've lost to mediocre Kentucky and LSU. So get ready for what I call a spit storm, not the other word, a split storm, the SEC. If this happens, they're not going to be held to 4 if any of this happens, if all these teams win out.
So I was stuck on Spitstorm there. Either way, the SEC is going to be interesting. We're talking about another SEC team next in Ole Miss. They will face Indiana. If the college football playoff bracket was to come true today, that would be the matchup. And Indiana, as you alluded to, Dennis, has kind of been this weird experiment this year, too. We weren't really expecting what Curt Cignetti really brought to the table here. But now that we've seen what they've done, right, first 10-win season in program history, competing to be in that CFP, what is at stake when they take on Ohio State this weekend?
Well, first of all, a spot in the Big 12 championship game, that's obvious. But there's so much at stake here. I would say, and I've written this, that this game on paper is the first big game of the expanded CFP era that's for seeding. You know, you look at it and go, they're both in. Well, there's so many layers to this. Again, if Ohio State is favored by 13, okay, if they boat race Indiana, what's a boat race? Is it 49-7? Is it by 15 points? Is it by 14? What if Indiana stays within 10 and turns the ball over 4 times? There's so many layers to this game because of the schedule strength. And I defy anyone. I didn't hear anybody, Danny, in July when they looked at Indiana's schedule and saw Ohio State and Michigan and said, they got it easy. But now it's being held against them. It's not their fault. They can't help if Michigan's down. I'll leave you with this. Indiana has beaten their average margin of victory is 30 points. That leads the nation. In 1983, Nebraska lost the 2-pointer, obviously, to Miami in the Orange Bowl, one of the biggest offensive teams of all time. They beat their opponents in the Big 8 and in non-conference by 33 points. I just want to put that in perspective, what Indiana's done. That, to me, is what makes whatever they do on Saturday meaningless. They should be in.
I agree with you, but I am very nervous if I'm an Indiana fan, wondering what would happen if they get 3 or 4 touchdowns. Like, I think the magic number they need to keep it in is about 14 to 17. Obviously, if they keep it to single digits or a touchdown, I think it's a lock. They're in. And I know some of the analytics say that no matter what the score is, they're in. But the reason I say 14 to 17 is go look at Texas. Texas is a very similar resume. They haven't played many strong opponents. They've got some blowouts against better teams, but their loss was against Georgia, one of the top 10 teams in the country. And the loss, Texas did not look great. They lost by 15 points, right around there, 16, 17 points, and no one brought it up. No one said, well, how did Texas look? Because it was a while ago. And all of a sudden, Texas, if they went out, they're a virtual lock. That's the opponent that I would hold up if I'm an Indiana fan and say, look, we held our own. We didn't get blown out. We were in that 2-touchdown number just like Texas was, who, by the way, was at home against Georgia. Now Indiana's got to go on the road. I think that's the one where you can comfortably make an argument saying we belong. If Texas belongs, Texas would be in. We have to be in too. I do get nervous, though, Dennis, if they get blown out, that could be something that keeps them out of the playoff. As wrong as I think it would be, I think I'd be cautious if they do get blown out.
It's just so
and Haley, let me add this real quick.
Yeah.
I talked to Jeff Long, who was the first chair of the CFP Committee, the old AD at Arkansas and Kansas. And he told me one of the biggest problems they had in the room was talking about conference affiliation. It's not supposed to matter. And that's a big conversation piece here. We know it does matter. These are humans. You can't get past the fact that do we give 4 to the SEC and 3 to the Big Ten? We don't know. But he said we couldn't control what went on in the restrooms and the hallways, but we could in the room. And they had to tamp it down a few times when people in the room were talking about how strong one conference is over the other. So I think that's something to consider here too.
Yeah, it's hard when you have to consider strength of schedule, right? Because it is such a factor, but these teams aren't necessarily in control of who they're playing. So it's just interesting that they have to kind of go back and forth and debate. That kind of rings true when we think about the Mountain West and the mess that it's been this season. Really, the only team that we're looking at there is, of course, Boise State and Ashton Genty. You do have Colorado State in the mix at 5-0. UNLV is close behind there in terms of the standings. But Danny, Boise State, what do you like about their chances to get into the CFP? Because it seems like that's really the only place we should be talking about when we look at Mountain West.
I think Boise State controls their own destiny. I think if they win out, they win and they're in. Now, last night we saw the selection committee give them that 4 seed and a coveted bye. I wouldn't put too much stock into that. We've seen the committee, put certain things up there and not be afraid to bump them down. And if you look at remaining strength of schedule, the teams in the Big 12 have tougher opponents where I think they could leapfrog them in the rankings and get into that 4 spot. But Boise State, the thing that's interesting about the Mountain West is I think the best 2 teams are Boise State and UNLV. But Colorado State, if they went out, they could end up facing Boise State. So it's a little bit of a wild, West toward sort of situation in the Mountain West. But I think Boise State is the strongest team out there, Dennis.
And then real quick, because we're tight on time here, we're going to go over to the Big 12. Dennis, I'll come to you here because Colorado has been the big surprise out of that renovated conference. Obviously, their path to the CFP at this point is winning the Big 12. What do you like about their chances getting in?
I like their chances. They do control their own destiny, but obviously so does BYU. You've got this showdown at Arrowhead Saturday with Kansas and Colorado. Kansas has beaten 2 ranked teams in a row. If they beat Colorado, I can't remember the last team in the country that beat 3 ranked teams in a row. And don't forget about Arizona State. They all but control their own destiny. A lot of things would have to happen for them not to get into the championship game if they win their final 2 games. They got into the conversation by upsetting Kansas State last Saturday. But one note about Colorado. Anybody who's hating on Deion should be spanked right now because I think he's fulfilled his destiny. He's done what he said he was going to do. He's turned that program around. They're going to be in the college football playoff conversation, if not in the bracket itself. I can't say enough good things about him. Saturday, how about this? The Heisman Trophy favorite in the crib of the defending Super Bowl champions. I love that game.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one to watch. I know you've had a change of heart when it comes to the Buffs, too, this season. It's really impressive. Guys, love talking ball with you. Thanks so much for hopping on as we get closer to that college football playoff expanded bracket. For more on the college football conversation, make sure you lock into the Cover 3 podcast. If you want more on that Indiana-Ohio State game this weekend, the C3 crew has you covered. That's the latest episode. You can listen in wherever you get your pods.